covering some breaking news here. Mahmoud Khalil, an activist who was jailed by the Trump administration and held in ICE custody for over 100 days with no arrest or explanation, has been finally freed. And he's hit back hard with a $20 million claim against the Trump administration. I'm Shant Karnikian. I'm joined by my partner, Brian Kabateck, on Civil Action on the Legal AF Network. Brian, tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, let me give a little background. I think people are mostly familiar with this case because it's received so much international attention, because it seems to me to be so abusive of the power of the government and of Trump and his administration. But this is, let me make no mistake about this. It could be confused with other cases, but Mr. Khalil was and is a permanent U.S. resident. That means he has a green card, like my mother-in-law from Great Britain, who's had a green card for 60 some odd years. And he was a student at Columbia University, and he was one of the people who organized the pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia, never was engaged in violence. There was no evidence that he ever committed a crime, that he was simply exercising his First Amendment right. And Shant, before we get into the rest of the story, I want people to be very clear. The Constitution of the United States applies to you and me as U.S. citizens, permanent residents like Mr. Khalil, visitors who just got off a plane and are coming to visit the United States, and undocumented aliens who are here. It applies to everyone inside the United States. There are no exceptions in the United States Constitution, right?
Well, yeah, but I think the Trump administration is having a lot of difficulty understanding that concept. The concept of due process, the concept of the Fourth Amendment, the Bill of Rights in general.
That's because I don't think any of them have ever gone to law school. I mean, some of them claim to be lawyers, but they just seem to be giving a wholesale disregard of the Constitution. And I think in part with the hope that their, packed Supreme Court will rule in their favor.
Yeah, they're testing the boundaries. And I know that this is kind of becoming a constant theme in what we talk about. This is part political theater, but also boundary testing. That's what it is. I mean, I think the important thing here is that detaining a permanent resident of this country, someone with a green card or someone who is here legally without due process, it is just a huge affront to the Constitution. I mean, you cannot do that. This person was in a detention center in Louisiana for over 100 days, never charged with anything. And this isn't a violent person. Regardless of the content of the speech, he was basically jailed and he had his freedoms taken away for those 104 days that he was in jail. Because I think the arrest happened in early March 8th.
March 8th. In New York City. And of course, he ended up in this detention facility in Louisiana because it's well known as a very harsh place. It's been criticized. And also, the Trump administration was hoping to find a favorable federal judge in Louisiana who would help them and rule in their favor. But that didn't happen because the case got ultimately transferred, I believe, to New Jersey. It was transferred to New Jersey on March 19th, but he remained in custody until just last month.
Yeah. And I think that's a major, problem for them to be testing the boundaries like this. This is now bordering on, locking up your political opponents. People.
I don't think it's bordering on it at all.
What's that?
I don't think it's bordering on it at all.
Yeah, it is. It is
exactly what they're doing. I mean, let's just change the facts slightly. Let's say that Mr. Khalil was a U.S. citizen. Can you scoop up a U.S. citizen off the streets because they are exercising their right to free speech? I mean, that is the First Amendment. That's the First Amendment that the founding fathers came up with when they were drafting and amending the United States Constitution.
Right. You can't do that, to answer your question. But now I have sort of my doubts that the Trump administration understands that concept. You unequivocally can't do that. It's a no-brainer. But if we allow for a legal resident, a lawful resident, to get arrested for something like this and be held in a facility, transferred around like that, no charges, no explanation, where do we draw the line? Like, when is soon it may be U.S. citizens? And I don't care what the content of the speech is. I would worry if this were happening to a pro-MAGA, if the My Pillow guy was jailed for his speech, I'd worry about this. It's not the subject of what he was pro or anti, or what he was protesting about, or what he was organizing protests over. It's the fact that you have someone that is jailed in the process of exercising their free speech, especially when it comes to political speech. It's even more troubling.
Well, let me bring folks up to speed here on what's happened. So just late last month, he was finally released on bail. And the judge said that she found no flight risk or danger and suggested retaliation for his activism. And interestingly, and this is interesting, is that the entire basis that they had for picking up Mr. Khalil in the first place was based on a letter written by Marco Rubio to ICE. And that was their justification. So an internal letter inside the administration was the entirety of their investigation as to why he was a threat. And they invoked a law dating back to the early 1950s about aliens disrupting the United States, which didn't fit at all. There was no indication of that at all. So it was a completely bogus, trumped up charge. I like that, trumped up. And then he was released, and he had to surrender his passport and limit his travel. And the government has since filed an appeal. But Shant, that's not the end of the story, right?
No, now that he's released, he's filed a $20 million federal tort claim. And we can talk a little bit about that because that's part of the legal procedure that needs to be followed before filing a federal lawsuit. So I could talk a little bit about that, Brian. You could chime in too. But the Federal Tort Claims Act provides that the government has certain immunities from getting sued for certain things. And there is a process by which to pursue it. And the first step of that is to present a tort claim, right?
Right. You have to make a claim when you sue a government. And that's the federal government under the Federal Tort Claim Act has the same requirement. So before you file a lawsuit, it's a precursor. And usually there's a time requirement if the government doesn't reject the claim, which they almost always do, that you file, then you're allowed to file your civil action in federal court. It's in front of a federal judge. You do not have the right to a jury, which I've always thought was inherently wrong. And he is represented by a group of very, very high profile nonprofit organizations, including a private law firm, but at NYU Immigrants' Rights, the ACLU of New Jersey, a variety of groups that are representing him in this case. And of course, I mean, this is what they should do.
I think there's major, there's so many violations just to think here about, First Amendment violation. You're retaliating against someone for exercising something protected by the First Amendment, political speech. He was clearly targeted for the subject of his speech. The Fourth Amendment violation, Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures, warrants or arrests without a warrant. Despite living here lawfully. And this has nothing to do with his immigration status either. Compare that to some of the ICE stuff that's going on. Those are violations too, but this is even more blatant, I think. So there's a Fourth Amendment violation and the Fifth Amendment violation, the due process violation. He was held for months with no legitimate explanation, no charges, no hearing, no meaningful opportunity to be heard or contest his detention. His freedom was deprived for over 100 days. That is wild. That's one of the fundamental rights we have in this country, to be free to move around. I mean, it's one of the founding tenets of this whole country, and it's enshrined in the Constitution. And for someone to just be locked up, no explanation, here you go, you're going to sit in a cell in Louisiana, is just incredible. It should be offensive to everyone, regardless of the content or what led to it. I don't care if this was someone that committed some sort of heinous act, but you still have rights. The system only works if these rules are followed. Where do we draw the line now?
So I'll give you my final thoughts on this, Shant, and
Sure.
you summed it up nicely. But first of all, I've heard a lot of these people in the Trump-verse, the MAGA-verse, say, there's a pathway to getting to this country. There's a pathway to doing it right. Well, Mr. Khalil did it exactly the right way. He's a permanent legal resident. He did it right. And now what we're seeing with him in his one case is sort of emblematic of what you're going to see in these cases now, where it's coming out that they're not following the Constitution when they're picking people off the street. when they're coming into businesses without search warrants, when they're when they're demanding to see people's papers. You can't do that. That violates the 4th, the 14th Amendment for sure. It violates the Constitution. You can't just stop people and because they're brown. And this conduct by the Trump administration and by Trump himself is deliberate. They want to push this as far as they possibly can. They believe that the Constitution simply does not apply to them and that they can do whatever they want. So I applaud Mr. Khalil doing this and his lawyers, but there needs to be a lot more of these kinds of lawsuits filed. So as usual, Shant, you get the last word.
Look, I think there's a lot at stake here, right? If he wins, they could set precedent limiting what the State Department or ICE can do in these types of situations, whether it comes to immigration enforcement or trying to shut down free speech when people are protesting. But if he loses, the problem here is that it becomes a green light for the administration to use immigration law or foreign policy concerns or national security concerns as a backdoor tactic to stifle political speech. They're going to use it as a censorship tool. When does it become, over here, their argument was this implicates national security or foreign policy issues. And I think they relied on some, outdated McCarthy era Cold War relic portion of a statute. How long until they start using this to lock up opponents, people that are speaking up against the administration, political opponent? That's what's at stake here. And that's why I think this is an important case to follow. And we will keep doing that. I'm Shant Karnikian. That's Brian Kabateck. We're two lawyers at Kabateck LLP. Our show is called Civil Action. You can follow us and subscribe if you want to hear more. And we'd love to hear your feedback on this. And thanks for tuning in.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.